He told me one time he was 14 months on the dry. And I remember saying to him, you know, the decision to pick up a glass with a drink in it after 14 months, that must be just the most momentous decision to take. You must be absolutely boiling with indecision and turmoil, and where is this leading me? And
those 14 months are probably the best 14 months of your, you know, your life, you know, because they were for me. I was going out with my kids. We were going away on holidays together. Work was booming in Dublin for me. I was getting work like every day in Dublin, and that's what happened to me. I was clean and sober for a good long time. I then went to Dublin. I was in a hotel on my own, and I just ordered up these 3 large vodkas, and I just sat them there for ages. They were there for about an hour, and then I just went, I think it's nearly time for the first one. So, and once the first one went down, I went down with it. My mother would have had to put me in an orphanage when I was 5. So, and you know, that was tough for her because back in those days, it just wasn't the done thing for a you know, at that time, a 28-year-old woman to be walking around with a 5-year-old black son.
I think one of the most heart-wrenching things he described to me was when Betty actually brought him to supposedly visit a friend in this place, and when he turned around and Betty was gone. And you know, everyone who reads that, it's just such a traumatic thing for a child to find yourself in that situation.
But my mum, as I said, couldn't have done anything else, you know, and she came to see me, as I said, and made sure that my life wasn't totally just getting cut off and getting left somewhere and then never seeing her again. So, and as I've said, we have a great rapport today, and you know, she's still my ma.
The first person I interviewed for the book was Paul's mother, Betty. I spent an afternoon with her, and it was fascinating to hear her story because it had never been told before, and she explained how it was just so socially unacceptable for her to have a baby, and indeed a black baby in 1960s Ireland. I mean, this was 1960, and it was a very different country we lived in at the time, and her father would have been absolutely incensed at the very idea that she was pregnant. So there was no question of Betty ever being able to keep the baby. She could never have brought the baby home. Her father would probably have run her out of the house, and she explained that to me, and she explained the heart-wrenching situation of handing over this child that she at the time couldn't be sure she'd ever see again.
Because there was an awful lot of kids in that orphanage, and there was fights and there was rows, and you know, when you get a big group of kids together like that, there was you know, people who you didn't mess with.
And it was a tough place, and there were very few favours being done for you, and you had to make your own way in the orphanage. And I think football eventually became the one thing where he could express himself, the one thing where he felt he never had to, you know, bow to anyone in there.
I realised that if you can play football to any halfway decent level, then people kind of had some sort of respect for you. And I used that all the way through my schooling, you know, to get onto the better teams. And, you know, everyone wanted to play soccer even back then.
I would have went to Sallynoggin Tech when we were around 12, which was when I was born in 1960, so it was around 72, I think, you know. And like that, we were all going into new school, new class. I knew some of the guys that I'd been in national school with, but Paul was one of the guys I didn't know. And at that time, there wasn't a coloured guy to be seen anywhere, you know. So to see a coloured guy alone was something new and something strange, you know. But he was shy enough guy. He still is, but he was shy then. But the one thing that he had going for him was that he could kick a ball, you know. And once you played in the schoolyard, we had the yard, and you'd be playing with a chamois or whatever you were playing with, and he stood out like a sore thumb, and everybody wanted to have him on their, you know, when you were picking teams, he was first pick, you know.
The lads came up training one Tuesday night, raving about this black young lad that had came to the school down in Sallynoggin Tech, and the following day I went down to see him playing. They had a tournament on the little, what was it, a tarmac had him beside the school. I went down to see him play.
Tommy Heffron came to watch me actually play during the break. We had a tennis ball and we used to play little games in the yard. And he came up there to watch me play a game, and then he came over to me and said, would you like to play for Pearse Rovers?
He had this talent in football, and it certainly gave him a degree of self-expression that maybe he wasn't able to find vocally at the time.
You couldn't get the ball at him. Absolutely brilliant. And my only concern was, how old was he and what date of birth he had, because at the time the 1st of August was the deadline for the start of the season. So when I approached Paul, I asked him his date of birth. It was September. That's grand, that's the first thing out of the way. The second thing, of course, was then I realised he was from the orphanage down in Monkstown, and it meant having to go to see Mr. Croxon to see would he allow him come out every Saturday and play football.
Pearse Rovers was a settled team in Sallynoggin, as was St. Joseph's Boys. You know, they were the two big rival teams up in Sallynoggin. I hadn't heard too much about them, to be honest, until I went to school in Sallynoggin.
The lads, as I said, knew him. John Young, Colin Bartley, Kieran Forsyth, all went to that school, and they encouraged Paul to play for us rather than go to the local St. Joseph's.
Wednesday was a hop day, you know. Wednesday afternoon, you went on the hop, and if you didn't have a ball to go, you didn't go. You had to, you know. We went along the metals of Dalkey and what have you, banging the ball around. And if we decided, right, but Wednesday we're going, anyone got a ball? No, you went into school because you hadn't got, you know. We just wanted to hang around, bang a ball. But that was usually it was Wednesday afternoon. We used to just always go missing, you know.
Paul, as I said, started off in the old inside right position, which is the number 8. That's the first position he actually started with us. And we did an outside right, again going back to the old days when you had an outside right, outside left called Noel O'Shea. And all I told Paul was, get the ball, give it to Stan and just support him. So we started off as a sort of midfielder come inside right, but the first match, as I said, he hadn't a clue. So the following week in training, I got the old Sabuti board out and showed him the position on the park. And it's not like it is now 4-4-2, 4-3-1 all these. It's 2 wingers, 2 inside forwards, centre forward. And Paul and John Young were my 2 inside forwards.
Remember Tommy had the Sabudio table, and he used to do a lot, and you know, he'd work with us all and on keeping our shape and what have you.
And I started off, Paul, as a midfielder because, like Jack Charlton, if you like, I had 2 very good centre halves. And Paul, to me, because of his physique, his energy, his enthusiasm, he'd run all day for you and he'd score goals for fun. And as I said, the first match he was rubbish. Second match, I remember it well, against Clondalkin Celtic, he scored 4 goals.
When he lived in Glensilva, you had to remember there was a football pitch at the back of Glensilva, and there was a prefab building out the back with a tennis table, and then next door to Glensilva was Knox Hall, and they had tennis tables, table tennis tables, which nobody had. Like for us going into Glensilva was free, you know, you could do what you like, but then when you went up the Racefield, it was even better. They had a 3/4 size snooker table. You could smoke, you know. So like Paul didn't smoke, but I did, and you could, you know, rather than hide the smokes on my mother, you could openly smoke down there. You could sit in the kitchen table and have a cup of tea and a cigarette. Then you had the table tennis. Then you had the television room. I remember the 1978 World Cup, sitting in there watching Argentina against Peru. There was about 16 of us around the television. Again, the same lads, John Young, Marty Finn, Colin Bartley, all sitting around till 11, 12 o'clock at night watching the Argentina 1978 World Cup. Great spot for teenagers.
I met a man called Tom Cullen down at Duck United, and I think he was trying to get another friend of mine who played with Pierce Rovers. John Young was his name. He was trying to get him down to Dalkey. So John was the one who persuaded me to come to Dalkey with him. So it seemed like the next move up to a different level, maybe seniors. So I said, I think I was 17 at that stage. So I said, yeah, this would be a good move, especially if John Young was going up, because he was a really good player. So I thought there'd be at least two of us in it anyway. So. I decided to move up to Dalkey.
He was as much an ordinary teenager as the rest of us. He was no different than the rest of us, except maybe that he was coloured and he was a talented footballer, and people would recognise him as he got older and older. At 15, 16, playing for Pierce, people say, "Oh, that's your man. He's supposed to be a good footballer and what have you." He was instantly recognisable. But as regards Glenn, as living in Racefield and the Board's Nest and Glen Silva. He'd say that, he'd say things like, I have to get in by a certain time or I'm going to be in trouble, or, and I'd say, what trouble would you get into? He says, you wouldn't get into too much, you'd probably stop you a bit of grub or something, things like that. But he'd never really talked about it, no. He'd talk about his mum and that time, about Betty, about going out to Betty.
Paul was accustomed to a climate of subordination, let us say, by the time he emerged from the institution at 16. And added to that, of course, he was black. And the combination of those two things meant that he didn't impose himself. He didn't impose himself as perhaps most Dublin kids or most kids around the country would have done at that stage.
We finished up at school by football with Pierce Rovers, and a lot of the guys that we would have been in school with would have been finishing up around the same time. And there was about 6, 7 or 8 of guys that went down to Dalkey at that time. There was Paul, John Young, myself, Marty Finn, Colin Bartley, Paddy Whelan, Jimmy Pluck. We all went to school together, all palled around together, and we all went to Dalkey at that time.
But I felt that Paul had the ability to go on further. Then Dalkey, Leinster, the very least would have went was League of Ireland.
Because I'd look at players like John Young and Des Kavanagh and Kieran Forsyth as well. There was a few players, Doug McClure, there was a few players around there at that stage that were really, really good wingers, good players, Chippy Devlin, that could have made it.
Whereas when he went to Dalkey, he had some people going with him. John Young went with him, Ramsey went with him, a few players went with him.
John and Paul broke into the first team fairly quick, and into a good first team, some really good players. And Paul played centre half, John played in midfield.
He knew some of the lads that were in Dalkey at the time, Eddie Baker and one or two other lads there, and he knew by going there, Dave Mason was there, having come back from Bohemians, and he knew by going to them that he would be in familiar territory.
I was 18 before I had my first drink, so, and 18 even before I went to my first disco.
He never drank, as far as I was aware, when he played football with Pierce Rovers.
First time Paul drank was on a trip to Germany with Dalkey United, and I think his teammates at the time saw instantly that there was an issue with Paul and drink, that it wasn't a case of just drinking for a good time and going out and enjoying the night. They actually couldn't enjoy the night out with Paul because he was drinking, and he became quite stupid and messy with drink, and there was a sense straight away that he wasn't going to a good place with drink.
I suppose he drank because it was peer pressure. I mean, we were all drinking. It wasn't a problem. I think and the drink on that trip wasn't a problem for Paul either. But he did get a bang in the game. But I don't know if that. I remember he came back then, and the first match was against Dunleary Celtic up in Sallynoggin, and he got another bang that night. And then it was during the weekend, and he was found down the flat down in Dunleary, and just wailing and weeping and what have you, and that was the start of it. So I don't know if the bangs on the head had anything to do with it. I don't know. I don't think the actual few beers that they had, or I think there was a bottle of Pernod going around at the time, had anything to do with it. I don't believe it had. I think the drink was a ladder thing, But as regards the breakdown,
Paul had had a nervous breakdown. So whatever path Paul was on shuddered to a standstill for the guts of 18 months, which is a huge amount of time out of the progress of a young footballer who's going to be seen by cross-channel clubs. And that's why I imagine that some of the League of Ireland clubs that Paul's services were offered to, they weren't really interested because they reckon maybe this kid was a bit troubled and had issues.
I don't know. It was his first trip away with lads. It was his first time going to nightclubs, going to discos. Because when we went to teenage discos, Paul didn't come. We'd go to the Royal Marine in Dunleary. There was all the Spanish students would be over, and you'd be there. But Paul wouldn't come, you know. And whether he wasn't allowed or I just think he was too shy to come. You know, he never drank. He used to drink coke to pay the band. You know, but that was. I don't know. I don't think the Germany trip. I think that the effect it had on his head was the first time that he'd been out with a gang of lads, and the first time he was out drinking and seeing way other people lived. And I think he might have come home to a flat living on his own in Dunleary, and the way he'd been brought up in Glensilva, the bird's nest, and everything.
He was, unfortunately, suffered badly over in Germany. I heard it was food poisoning he got over there. As you say, maybe a bang on the head, concussion. But he came back, he was in St. Vincent's Hospital for a long, long time. And when I went to see him in hospital, he'd lost an awful lot of weight. Now, he was thin and he was lean, but he looked a fright when I saw him in the hospital.
When Paul got out of St. Brendan's, he wanted to go back to Bochum and he asked me to go with him. And just the two of us went back. And I think I don't know whether he wanted to get his head right or to see what happened. I don't know why, but he specifically said, I want to go there, will you come with me? So I went with him, and I think that was only my second time away. The first time was the first time to journey with the team.
Paul McGrath was already committed to signing for Manchester United ever before he left Dalkey. The concept of him playing in the League of Ireland for a club, which hadn't been determined at that stage, that concept was necessary because of the financial implications of the move.
Suddenly out of the blue, there's a call from Charlie Walker from St. Pat's, and he said he'd love to come up and chat to my mum and my grandmother. And I was thinking, well, geez, we're getting another go at this where he's going to want me up to do a bit of training with St. Pat's team. But he didn't even want that. He came up and he said, we'd like to offer you a position up at St. Pat's. So I was thinking, well, geez, we don't even have to do the training. We're getting an offer. So, and that's the way it turned out. I went up to St. Pat's and I trained with the lads. I met some of the fellas and they were a great bunch. You know, they were all wanting to help you in the training. Where we was just left behind in the other two training sessions, they were really willing you to join in and be involved in it. So it was an easy decision for us. They just said, you know, come play for us, you know, and you'll get your game and you get a try. And if you're not good enough, of course, you'll get let go. But if you're good enough, you'll get your chance.
He wasn't 6 months in the League of Ireland. He was getting the nickname Black Pearl of Inchicore. The people of Inchicore were loving him, and you know, Joey Malone will tell you that playing centre half against with him was a pleasure. I knew another guy that played with Dalkey United, used to play behind him, Eddie Bryan, and Eddie used to say, if anyone got by Paul, I knew they were good, so I just took them down. You know?
Ron Atkinson was the manager of Manchester United when Paul sat down at Old Trafford, and Atkinson, in his own colourful style, would tell later, he would recall how Paul arrived with his entourage in Old Trafford.
Ron suddenly says, right, I'll have the Pats lads in now, and all of a sudden our load go into the office, and Ron's looking around going, Jesus, who's this, like, you know. And he suddenly says, look, I only deal with the manager and the player and maybe the director, but you know, what's this? There's about another 8 people in his office. So he says, use lock and shift.
According to Atkinson, there was about 5 or 6 people with Paul to trash out the deal. Not that it did him much good, because Manchester United were notorious for their meanness, virtually. You know, they never overpaid players.
They're pretty mean, if I'm being honest. I was on £16 a week as an apprentice. I made my debut when I was 16, and I was on £16 a week.
And I heard something about £100 or something, and I was thinking, am I at Manchester United now? And I heard this ridiculous amount of money, and I thought, well, hang on, I'm making more money in Ireland, and this man's wanting me to play for one of the biggest teams in Europe, and he's wanting to give me less than I get home in Ireland. So I thought, well, just can't be right. I mustn't have heard him right or something like that. But that's what I did here. And when I went out, I said it to the lads at St. Pat's. I said, look, I really, although I'd love to play for Manchester United, I really don't want to be coming here. Him telling me they're giving me less money, and you know, it's just not on.
Football wasn't the same then as what it is now, you know, and the money we went on then at the time during the 80s, people in the 60s and 70s would look at that and go, wow, look at the money there now compared to what we are. It has changed an awful lot, you know, so you're not comparing like with like when you say it now. It wouldn't happen to the likes of a Paul McGrath going over now. That sort of situation would never happen.
When Paul actually said to Ron Atkinson that he wasn't particularly happy with the money, because he could nearly have earned as much money back here in Dublin, Ron Atkinson said, okay, got up from his chair and said, okay, off you go, back to Ireland, at which point Paul sat down and signed the contract. So there was that kind of bullying dimension to it. That was the deal. You went over there and you did what you were told and you signed, and that was it.
So they went back in and said it's Ron, and Ron said, basically said, well, that's what it is, take it or leave it, you know. So then they came back out to me to tell me that, and then eventually I said, well, I didn't say I wouldn't stay, because he scared the living daylights out of me. So eventually I said, look, whatever he's asking me to sign, I'll sign it. So
He was done very, very badly, you know, and unfortunately again he got a lot of bad advice because he was told, well, take it or leave it, you don't say no to Man United. Ron Atkinson was the manager at the time, didn't even see him playing, and that was the ultimatum that Paul got. And because Pats at the time were financially embarrassed, they wanted Paul to sign so they get the money. They, I won't say forced him to sign, but they certainly didn't look after his interests at the time.
My understanding is that Pat's got 30,000 out of the transfer.
He was earning more working for CP Security and playing for Pats part-time than he was playing for Manchester United first team. And